I rarely leave my house without wearing headphones. Often, I'm not even paying attention to what I'm listening to. The music or the podcast piped into my ears helps to distract me from everything else. It creates a bubble of protection around me against the din of New York City, both on the street and in the subway. It may help cover the assault of sound, but it doesn't block out all the noise. The world around us is constantly demanding our attention. Be it buskers or beggars, ads or announcements, we are pulled in a million directions all day long. This has become such a noticeable trend that some have begun referring to our economy today as an attention-based economy. Dr. Matthew Crawford, a researcher at the Institute for Advanced Cultural Studies at University of Virginia, published a book a few years back about this issue. In a Times article on the book, he wrote, "What if we saw attention in the same way that we saw air or water, as a valuable resource that we all hold in common? Perhaps if we could envision an attentional commons, then we could figure out how to protect it." Throughout the Torah portion this week, where we place our attention is central. There are two forms of turning attention in this portion. There's shuv, the desired form, turning our attention to God, and there is panah, the undesired form, when we project our attention elsewhere, namely to other gods. In an attention economy, this text takes on new meaning. Our ancient ancestors knew that what we turn to, that is, where we focus our attention, predicted our future. Moses relays to us the choices that we have. We can return our attention to God, which will bring us life, or we can turn away towards the other things which will lead to our destruction. It's this responsibility to control our attention that is the crux of our covenant. And this choice has never been more present or clear than it is today. Crawford diagnoses the problem in this way. Lately, our self-appointed disruptors have opened up a new frontier of capitalism, complete with its own frontier ethic, to boldly dig up and monetize every bit of private headspace by appropriating our collective attention. In the process, we have sacrificed silence, the condition of not being addressed. And just as clean air makes it possible to breathe, silence makes it possible to think. Silence is not just what makes it possible to think. It's our tradition's way to attend to God. In the book of Kings, Elijah the prophet has a very close and personal encounter with God on Mount Horeb. It's recorded as follows. "And God passed by, and a great and strong wind rent the mountains and broke the rocks into pieces, but God was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but God was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but God was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still small voice. And it was so when Elijah heard it, that he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood in the entrance of the cave." Elijah, in search of God, does not find God in all of the overtly distracting elements coming at him. Instead, Elijah finds God in the silence after, and that respite from all the attention-demanding phenomena around him. This silence was what allowed him to hear that still small voice. Ancient Israelites, like Elijah, saw past the manifestations of power in nature to a singular source, rather than ascribing a different God to every manifestation around them. But in other words, the Israelites found one God of all in silence, while their neighbors found a multitude of gods in the world around them. Our Torah portion is pleading with us to make room for just this kind of silence in our lives. Rather than returning to silence where God dwells, our attention is always pulled outwards to all of the manifestations around us. The power, the distractions, the shining totems built particularly to attract our attention. The timely message of this portion is also one of hope. After explaining what is demanded of our attention, Moses tells us, Ki ha-mitzvah hazot asher anochi mitzavcha hayom lo nifleti mimcha v'lo rechokahi ki karov elecha hadavar me'od b'fika u'vilevavcha la'asoto. Surely this instruction which I enjoin upon you this day is not too baffling for you, nor is it beyond reach. For this thing is very close to you, in your mouth and in your heart to do. In the world described by Matthew Crawford, there's little hope for a respite from those entities surrounding us, vying for our attention. But the Torah tells us it's very simple. We need only seek out silence. Sometimes, when I put in my headphones to venture out into the city, I put on some form of white noise. I usually do this when I'm feeling overwhelmed by emotion or frustration, or when my brain feels like it's already processing far too much information. This allows me to turn my attention inward, to close my mouth and to listen to my heart. I momentarily blot out all of the distractions around me in order to seek that same silence that Elijah found at Mount Horeb. To allow all of the overwhelm, the emotion, and the backlog of thought to quietly express itself. Sometimes, even often, I sense the small, still voice that is ever present just behind the silence. Between our prayers, after one musical piece has stopped and before the next has started, try to listen in to that silence. Try to find that still small voice waiting to be heard. May this Shabbat and the coming High Holy Days create vast opportunities for you to seek that silence and the still small voice behind it. Shabbat Shalom.